Hello, you are listening to another edition of the Korea Pod. My name is Henry Shin. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you see podcasts. It does help to get the word out. And as I always say, we definitely appreciate it if you do so. All right, let's talk about this somewhat bizarre story that's kind of made waves in recent days here in Korea. And it involves a celebrity couple or alleged celebrity couple. And the definition of celebrity couple would be two people who are somewhat in the public eye, whether they're in the entertainment industry or they're prominent or well-known for whatever reason or another. And we're talking about this case involving this guy who is a broadcast personality, entertainer, I guess you could say. He's comes out on variety programs and does certain things like that. His name is LJ. That's his stage name that he goes by. And another person who is much more prominent, she was a member of one of the more popular girl groups at the time, Tiara, and her name is Hwayoung, or her Korean name, Ryu Hwayoung. And she left the group, and now she is a pretty successful actress in her own right. And so what happened, if I just give you a bit of a timeline of what occurred, is that this guy, LJ, he's about 41 years old. He all of a sudden on his social media, on Instagram, posted several photos of him and Ryu Hwayoung in various kind of settings. They were either eating together or it looked like they were on some kind of trip, like a resort or something. They were on a vacation. And he said basically that this person was his girlfriend. It came out of the blue. People were like, what the hell is going on? And this was very, very unusual, because if you know Korean entertainment, you know that this kind of stuff, especially with celebrity couples, is meticulously staged by the management agencies of the respective stars. So let's say, I'm not trying to be too cynical here, but there will be these photos that kind of come up from time to time about these two stars that were seen together, and there might be some photos of them together, all of a sudden making its rounds on social media. And then inevitably, both sides, the management agencies, if they are different agencies, will officially put out a statement saying the girl and the guy, that they are not a couple, that they're just friends, and it was just a coincidence that they were seen together. And later on, after all that speculation is built, then indeed there will be an official announcement saying that yes, the two built up a friendship, and they eventually found each other very, very attractive, and they started dating, and they're in this beautiful, loving relationship. And that's usually how it goes, and it's sort of this kind of interesting drama for fans to follow along, but there is that cookie cutter pattern that you normally see with Korean celebrities, especially two celebrities who become couples. But this is very different, and this is certainly not a fairy tale type of situation, because this guy, LJ, is basically saying, here are some photos, and in the comments he says, yep, that's my girl. And so that sounded a little bit strange. A lot of people felt it was unusual, and right away you saw that from the representation of Ryu Hwayoung's side, they said nope, they were not a couple, that they weren't dating. And maybe you could have said, okay, that seems like the way agencies usually handle it. They say, oh, they're not dating, they're just friends, and maybe later on they're gonna have a kind of come to Jesus moment where they go, yes, we were friends, but we got to know each other, and now we are indeed a couple. And so please support us in our mutual relationship and hope the best for us. But that's definitely not what happened with this case. So subsequently, Hwayoung, she sat down for an interview, and she basically laid out what was her side of the story, because LJ was basically very, very steadfast in his claims that they were a couple. And so he basically is saying they're a couple, they've been together for a long time. Her agency said, no, that's not the case. And then I think Hwayoung essentially made the decision that I'm going to probably take a hit for this, but regardless of the backlash that I get, I've got to put this out there. And so she sat down for an interview, and she basically said that they were not in a relationship, and they were not dating for 2 years, which was a claim that LJ had said. But basically, she knew the guy from, let's say, a year ago, and they were basically acquaintances, but that the guy was really nice to her, always kind of sweet, and always tried to help her out, and she suspected that he might have feelings for her, and she asked him that, and he basically said, nah, he was trying to play it cool, and he just said, no, he didn't. But then later on, he kind of confessed his feelings. That's kind of the Korean term, where he says, I am infatuated with you, or I like you, or I love you, or whatever. And so that he basically said, I wish that we could have a relationship. Now, what her side of the story is that, so after he basically confessed his love for her, she said, this guy's been really nice to me. He's been a good guy. I think he's somebody that I could perhaps pursue a relationship. And so she said, let's give it a shot. And so I think the way the story goes is they apparently started dating. And what Hwayoung is saying is that after about a week, she started noticing very disturbing tendencies in him. She said that he had a very violent personality, vulgar, and that he was also very possessive and very jealous. I think you guys know the type, those kind of insecure guys who tend to be really possessive of that girl, is really scared to lose that girl. And so he was always kind of suspicious of her, and he was really kind of being creepy. And so after that week, she decided, you know what? I don't think I can do this anymore. And so it was one of those things, right? If you know about relationships and you've been through one, you know that a lot of times it ends up with the other side saying, let's just be friends. And that's what she essentially said. She gave him a, let's just be friends. I don't know if it's not you, it's me type of cliche, but she said, let's just be friends. And she tried to, according to her again, make it work out where they could just stay on good terms as friends. But she said that it just wasn't the case because he was just continuing that sort of creepy stalker behavior. He would call constantly, telling her things like, he was not eating anymore. I don't know if it was a hunger strike or he was just so heartbroken that he couldn't eat, and that he would commit suicide. A lot of that kind of creepy stuff that you often hear with these spurned lovers in a relationship who do not want to have that relationship. And he started threatening her, saying that he was going to tell reporters, come out with this relationship. He apparently even forcibly entered her home without permission. A lot of these anecdotes that she kind of recounted, stuff like showing up without any warning, or giving these gifts that weren't very welcome, and calling her agency and threatening the agency, saying that, I've got a lot of photos and evidence that we have a relationship. I will not create a big stink if you, the agency, put out a public statement saying that we have been in a relationship for 2 years. I don't know what the goal of that would have been. Probably to say if they were dating for 2 years publicly, she would have no choice but to be publicly involved in a relationship with this LJ guy, and so that, de facto he would be dating her in a public setting, and so that maybe he felt that gave him another shot at rekindling this relationship. So that all sounds pretty nasty. It sounds pretty sordid. It sounds pretty creepy, and that was the situation at hand. Now, the question, I guess, where there was skepticism against Hwayoung is, why did you initially deny this relationship? And so her side of the story is that, well, she did not want to kind of deal with this situation, and she didn't want to have this become public. She herself felt it was an insignificant relationship, at least romantically speaking, because she dated him for about a week. She ended the thing. So it was really sort of a blip on her radar. And it wasn't necessarily something that she felt had to be this huge public kind of controversy. And discussing this relationship to her, where it was just a thing that she decided to end after 1 week, and she wanted to put it past her. But because it's grown into this big thing, and because it seemed like LJ was becoming increasingly erratic and irrational in the way he was approaching things, including this sort of abusive behavior that he showed and all of this stuff, she felt that she had to tell her side of the story regardless of whatever backlash she would get from it. And she says that she's actually feeling very hurt because she had considered him to be a good friend, a good guy, a nice guy. And she's just pretty despondent that it's come to this point. And there's some other kind of interesting and sort of disturbing aspects of the story is that she has a twin sister. Her name is Ryu Hyoyoung, and she is also a entertainer. She's a singer, not on the same level of fame as Hwayoung, but apparently they were both friends with this LJ person, and she had tried to come out and explain the abusive relationship that she was in, and that it seemed to her at the time that her twin sister, this is a twin sister, that Hyoyoung was actually taking the side of LJ, and that was kind of shown because there was that text message that LJ released showing that he was talking with Hyoyoung, and they were talking about the relationship and that how it might end, and that he still wanted to help out Hyoyoung and be a good friend to her, and she was kind of really being supportive, and it's all weird because there's that twin dynamic and the seemingly different relationship that Hwayoung and the negative and positive feelings that they each had for this LJ guy, again, just from the evidence of these text messages. And so all of that is out in the public now. And so it's become a sort of he said, she said situation because, again, LJ has come out in response to all of this and basically saying this is all lies. I don't know why she's doing this. We were in a relationship for a long period of time. You can ask my friends. You can ask my family members. I brought her to meet my parents. I tried to treat her like a queen. I did everything for her. And she was basically just very, very kind of, the way he depicted it is very kind of spoiled and entitled person. And because he was an much older person in the relationship, as he is like about 41 years old, she's in her 20s. So he's saying that he tried to be the better person in this and sort of be patient through all of the sort of indignations that he suffered through that relationship. But now that she's come out with all these lies and kind of painting him as this creepy stalker, he's just completely devastated by all of this, and he just does not want her to lie about this relationship anymore. And he feels that he's been used, and he's now kind of painting himself as the victim of this relationship. And so, again, we're seeing this back and forth, and I don't know how much this back and forth is going to continue. I believe that at the time of this taping, once this comes out, there's going to be a lot more details or more he said, she said responses that go back and forth between them. But bottom line, the point is that this is a situation where you see two celebrities. One claims that there's a relationship, the other says there wasn't, and then later on, the other person says, yeah, well, there was a brief relationship, but it was abusive. I thought that the guy was a creep, the guy was possessive, he was needy, and he ended up becoming this weird stalker. And it's not a good look. And I gotta say, it's hard to necessarily, in a he said, she said situation, try to definitively be on one side or the other, but it does have that blueprint and the hallmark of all of those other cases you've seen of the so-called nice guys. And nice guys is a term that you see in the States a lot, where you have these guys who kind of may not be genuinely nice guys, but they're attracted to women. They don't have a lot of success with women, but they put on that nice guy persona, and they are quote unquote friends with all these girls, but their actual real motivation beneath the surface is to get into the girls' pants. They want to sleep with the girls, or they want to have a relationship with these girls. And so they put on this nice guy aura to try to get in with these girls. And ultimately it doesn't work, and they feel then used and abused and exploited. And so these guys then end up tending to become what we see that has become a bit of a major phenomenon, both in Korea and in countries like the U.S., where you talk about these things like incels, right? Involuntary celibate people. Basically, men who have not had a lot of success with women, these heterosexual men who are frustrated, who end up becoming very resentful and angry against women and start to lash out, and then start to become more and more misogynistic in their views. And then they start to listen to people who may not have the best intentions, who kind of exploit those misogynistic feelings. And you see the buildup of these things like the men's right movement, or things like the alt-right movement. And in Korea, it could result in something like being a member of Ilbe. And then you have this group of very disgruntled young men who then just engage in this very, very destructive behavior, not just to other people, not just to females, to society, and even to themselves, because it just isn't a healthy way to live. I'm not saying that that definitely is the case against LJ, but it just kind of has all of the hallmarks of being that type of person. Maybe Hwayoung is just very brilliant in painting the picture and kind of doing the PR and crafting the story and the narrative to work against LJ to make him look like that kind of person. But just judging from his comments and what he said, and how he seems to be very desperate to prove that this was a real long-term relationship, and that he was the victim, and that he did everything possible to make the relationship work, and how he was basically waiting on her hand and foot and just being the perfect guy, and that all he got was this abuse and kind of ungrateful behavior, and how he felt basically exploited by the situation, without, again, definitively making a judgment on this, because I don't want to anger people who may be sympathetic to LJ's case. And again, at this point, this is a purely he said, she said situation. There seems to be some issues here. And you think about people who are in the public eye, they're celebrities, they're on TV a lot. You think they live a glamorous life. A celebrity like LJ, you could get any girl you want, you would think, right? But maybe that's not the case. Maybe he just became really infatuated with Hwayoung. He met her as an acquaintance, was attracted to her, wanted a relationship, and did everything he could to get that relationship facilitated, being really nice, cleaning her house, doing all these things. And she maybe she was not necessarily completely sincere in the way she did it. And there's all that kind of back and forth accusations of, do people lead each other on? Are people kind of using people for favors just because they know that that person is so infatuated with them? And is that also morally reprehensible? Yes, it is. And so we'll never know the full story of the situation. It is messy. And the fact that there's this kind of sense of too much information, because they're all airing this dirty laundry in the public, and the public might be feeling, gosh, do we have to know this? I think one side will be saying, dude, LJ, you got to stop, because it's just making you look more and more pathetic. And, you're a guy, you got to just take your losses and move on. Or the other side will say, man, what a shrew, what a harpy, Hwayoung. I know every girl that's been like that in my life, who's used me like that. You're totally fitting that description. And so, everyone will take this situation and use it as an avatar and project their own resentments and feelings and misgivings against the opposite sex. And this kind of increased sort of tensions we see between the genders, whether with what I've talked about before, with Ilbe and with WOMAD, and how these kind of radical groups are up at against each other and kind of roiling society. And all of the debate over the Me Too movement and how there is this need for a stronger voice advocating for women's interests and rights and their victimhood and talking and addressing those concerns. And so it's a very small microcosm of it. It's juicy gossip as a sort of celebrity story. But again, we're seeing that it is sort of a kind of prototypical case of the difficult and complicating dynamics you see between men and women who are trying to date, trying to find their significant other, trying to get by in this world, and all of these kind of emotional roller coasters that people go through. And unfortunately, in this point in society, it's really become such a sort of under the microscope situation where it is now, with the climate of gender wars and addressing wrongs and the wider Me Too movement, it's really become an exacerbated situation where people do feel you got to take a side and you can't be neutral. And one guy's a bad guy, one guy's a good guy, and it's a shame. But really, it is sort of kind of brought into a nutshell, really, in this one example with this sort of he said, she said case with LJ and Hwayoung. Well, that's my take on it, and I believe you might agree or disagree. But nevertheless, hope you enjoyed the podcast. We will be back with another edition of the Korea Pod. Thank you for listening. My name is Henry Shin. Goodbye.